Canada as the world sees it, a land of unspoilt wilderness, led by the poster boy of progressive politics, Justin Trudeau.
Climate change is real, and it is a challenge.
Who's cast himself as an environmental champion.
Alpha November, Kilo Delta 5, confirm at 2000.
But there's another Canada. It was recently announced that the country is warming twice as fast as the rest of the world. I've come to ground zero, Alberta's tar sands, roughly the size of Florida.
This is the end, beautiful friend.
This wasteland is where bitumen is blasted from the earth under the most extreme oil extraction process, using enough energy daily to heat 3 million homes. Canada's tar sands, Canada's most shameful environmental secret. Below me is what's been called the largest and most destructive industrial project in human history. The only way to get some sense of it is from the air. These massive oil operations have caused staggering levels of carbon emissions and toxic sludge on an unimaginable scale. This is apocalyptic environmental destruction. Just as Trudeau is supposed to be cutting carbon emissions, they would massively increase under controversial plans to expand an existing oil pipeline his government has bought. The Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion will see a twin pipeline follow the same route as an existing one from Edmonton to the west coast, tripling oil production from 300,000 to almost 900,000 barrels a day. It's a project that's divided the nation.
Prime Minister Trudeau, Inigo Gilmore from Channel 4 News in London. Last month, your own climate experts said that Canada's warming 2 times faster than anywhere else on the planet. It looks like the Trans Mountain Pipeline might go ahead, which leads to another massive spike in carbon emissions.
We've actually
Isn't this
moving
going to be
forward.
disastrous for Canada and for the world?
Sorry. You finished your speech?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. We're actually moving forward with a strong plan to put a price on pollution right across the country. We've forced the provinces that do not want to move forward with the price on pollution to make sure they have a price on pollution. We're moving forward with a plan that's going to both grow the economy, create jobs, and fight climate change, and we're going to reach our Paris targets.
For the pipeline project to succeed, Trudeau has sought the support of First Nation groups who still control large swathes of territory. I came to Alberta to meet Indigenous Chief Alan Adam.
So that's how you do it. You put the music up and you just hit the river.
Go.
Chief Adam was also born on a bayou around this river, the Athabasca.
As a kid, when I was growing up, when I was young, we used to swim in this water in the river. We used to drink from the river. Now we don't do that anymore.
The chief has seen the destructive tar sands oil operations firsthand. Extracting bitumen requires vast quantities of river water and toxic chemicals.
So what is the toxins in this river? What toxins do you have?
There's all kinds of toxics. They got cadmium, they got arsenic, they got mercury, whatever comes with all the oil production.
For years, Chief Adam has fought the oil industry, but though conflicted, he's ready to strike a deal with Trudeau's government.
They want to construct a pipeline. You know, sure, it's going to expand the oil sands whatsoever. They're going to do it anyway, regardless of what. But at least if we have an ownership, we have a say at the table. And when you have a say at the table, it comes a lot bigger than having a say on the outside. You can't beat them on the outside because they'll just wait you out. And they got the billions of dollars to do it, and they'll do it.
We set off along the route of the pipeline to find out just why this project has so divided the country. Our first stop, Jasper National Park. This pristine wilderness is known as Canada's postcard. The expanded pipeline will carve through here, under rivers and across Indigenous land. We met the Wesley family from the Stoney First Nation community. This is their ancestral land.
The line is laying underneath here.
So if the pipeline bursts, you're saying all of this environment here will be destroyed?
This whole area would be dead. Bottom line,
Dead.
nothing will survive.
Many Indigenous groups still feel marginalised, and the Wesleys say the Stoney people were not consulted about the pipeline.
Once all this is gone, when these pipelines, when they're no use, are they going to come and clear them out? Trudeau don't own the land.
We left the Stoney people and moved on to Blue River, a town of just 150.
We're really hoping for it in Blue River. It's going to give us some jobs, more exposure as we're becoming a ghost town. There's our cemetery to our left right here.
The pumping station's back there. So this is where the pipe's going to be crossing the river here. Watch your footing. This is the North Thompson River.
The new pipeline will go under the river here.
Straight across there where that opening and the trees are.
I asked Robin about concerns that the pipeline would put this unspoilt wilderness at risk.
They're protesting, yet they drive vehicles. They fly to Hawaii, they fly to Mexico. I call them leaf lickers.
Leaf lickers?
Leaf lickers is a environmentalist, like a tree hugger, but we call them leaf lickers.
Across the other side of Blue River, we went to meet one of those leaf lickers who Robin refers to.
We're not going to be kept on that Indian reserve anymore.
Activist Canna House Manuel set up this camp last year to protest against the pipeline, much to the fury of many locals.
Different people have come here and threatened us, called us names, threatened to kill us, driving by, you know, just yelling profanity and everything at us. And
What do they say to you?
We're going to kill you.
Despite the threats, she won't back down.
This pipeline takes and puts our lands in too much risk for our children, and we're not willing to take that risk.
I headed along the final stretch of the pipeline route to Burnaby, the pipeline's export outlet. Residents here are among the fiercest critics of the new pipeline and have joined many protests. They're incensed by plans to expand a huge oil storage facility here, fearing environmental disaster.
These are all my first and second cousins. My cousin Leanna, cousin Gord, Greg, other cousin. She don't wave, she's not a cousin. The only cousins wave.
I met with Reuven George. His community have been involved in many legal battles with the oil industry and may bring action to try to stop the pipeline.
The likeliness of a spill along the pipeline, then the likeliness, 80% chance of a spill happening here. It's brutal. It's just brutal, and it doesn't make sense.
His community sits along the Barad Inlet, and it's here that tanker traffic is expected to increase sevenfold to 250 a month. There are fears for the safety of a pod of killer whales who swim these waters.
If Justin Trudeau does approve the expansion, it might just be the beginning of his problems.
Well, we gave them a choice. A long time ago, we said you could do this the easy way and the hard way. They chose the hard way. Now we're giving them another choice. You could do this the hard way or the harder way. So we'll see what he chooses.
The approval of the Trans Mountain Pipeline has huge global implications and risks turning Trudeau from climate champion to pariah.
Inigo Gilmore there. Now here, more than 700 homes have to be demolished and a 12-lane section of the M25 will have to be diverted through a new tunnel. Just some of the drastic measures that will need to happen according to Heathrow's so-called master plan if a third runway is to be built by 2026. But critics say it will bring hundreds of extra flights each day, cause massive noise pollution and push up the UK's carbon emissions. Siobhan Kennedy reports.
If Boris Johnson, as he promised, wanted to lie down in front of the diggers to stop the third runway at Heathrow, he'd be here among the daisies. Today, after nearly 2 decades of wrangling, Heathrow unveiled its so-called master plan.
We want to be a good neighbour and to leave a positive legacy.
a contentious £14 billion scheme to grow the UK's biggest and busiest airport.
We need to expand.
Heathrow says the capacity is desperately needed, but to get there, hundreds of homes will be bulldozed and schools, roads, even rivers rerouted. From this, the site today, to this, the fully built, finished runway in 2026. Aside from the rumble of the first and second runways, the only noise pollution right here are the birds. Yet according to that map, I'm standing on the exact spot where the third runway will be built, cutting through these scenic moorlands and even this river here beside me, which according to Heathrow is just one of those that will simply be diverted away. And if you think moving a river is complicated, try this, digging a tunnel for the M25 and its hundreds of thousands of cars, trucks and lorries to go not around but underneath the new runway. It's construction on an epic scale, but with environmental consequences to match. By Heathrow's own calculations, by 2050, the third runway would create an extra 184 million tonnes of carbon. It plans to mitigate that by having, among other things, a new ultra-low emission zone around the airport and an extended ban on night flights. But they will only have a minimum impact, cutting emissions by just 2%, still a hefty 180 million tonnes. Heathrow says it hopes the carbon will be offset, but that's up to the airlines. Without it, many believe the government's new zero emissions target for 2050 will be quickly grounded. Geraldine Nicholson is a local campaigner who's been walking in these fields for years.
I love coming here. It's quite peaceful, even though we're right next to the airport. You don't get much of the planes or the motorways, especially further in, deeper in. There's no noise. It's really peaceful. I don't want to be walking beside a runway with my dogs.
And you don't buy their idea that it will be as green and as lovely with even new and bigger spaces?
No. They're saying construction is going to take 30 years. So are we going to have to wait 30 years to get our green spaces back? The other thing is as well, I think it's quite insulting that I have to, or my friends have to, give up their homes just so that somebody can fly for the price of a cup of coffee. You know, end those cheap flights. Our children will become ill. Heathrow will kill us off before climate change does.
Now follows a 12-week consultation, after which Heathrow will apply for planning consent. Opponents believe they can still get it thrown out. If they fail, more than 700 planes will thunder down a new runway here every day, 250,000 a year. And these rivers and fields will be no more.
Well, I'm joined now by Baroness Worthington, Executive Director of the Environmental Defence Fund and who worked on the last Labour government's Climate Change Act. Baroness Worthington, is it a contradiction, do you think, for the government to back a third runway and also this net zero emissions pledge?
So I think expanding Heathrow was always going to be really troublesome, given how close it is to such a huge conurbation. And people are rightly worried about the impact in terms of air and noise pollution and the climate impact. So this was never going to be an easy decision.
But is it a contradiction?
Whether it's a contradiction, the way that we've got to reduce emissions is to put all of aviation into a strategy, and individual changes of aviation kind of strategies on the ground in terms of airports have really big local impacts. But globally, what we need is a solution that covers all of the globe's emissions from aviation, and including a national plan for our net zero strategy.
So don't do the third runway, but also constrain aviation further with fewer, more expensive flights, or what?
Well, yeah, I mean, everybody probably knows this, but aviation gets a huge subsidy by not paying any tax on its fuel, and there's a further subsidy because they don't pay anything for the pollution that they're contributing. So really,
so change that for starters.
Definitely change that for starters. And I mean, obviously everyone's very exercised by this decision, but the energy we put into this would actually be better placed into campaigning for that big change across all of the aviation sector's emissions. And we can do that globally, and we can also do that in the UK context.
But you'd quite like to see Boris Johnson lying down in front of the bulldozers still?
Well, I probably won't comment on what I'd like to see happen to Boris Johnson. But this is going to be an issue that runs and runs because it's so close to such a large population of people. And so you kind of have to think, you know, this is going to be a totemic fight. But there's a bigger fight that we need to fight, which is about getting this whole sector to take this issue seriously. And to, as the lady on the film said, you know, cheap flights, that era is over, and we've got to start paying for the real cost of those flights.
And when the Chancellor says the cost of the net zero pledge is reportedly £1 trillion, is that remotely affordable?
Oh, well, let's see what Treasury's numbers actually made up of, because it's been very untransparent. But, I mean, there's going to be a huge cost to climate change happening to us. You know, even Heathrow acknowledged that with warmer temperatures, we're going to see problematic. The runways are going to need to be constructed differently. So we're going into a future where the consequences of climate change are starting to be felt economically.
But economically, don't we need Heathrow expansion?
No, I don't think, actually, that there's anything you can point to that say one individual airport or another is the categoric answer to GDP growth. And actually, you know, the links between aviation expansion, it may well be that if we priced aviation properly, that we'd see alternatives to aviation emerging, in which case this might be a stranded asset.
And you've been talking about the tax regime for aviation, but also aviation, despite the net zero pledge, could still get a free pass by using international carbon credits. Some people have been calling for the government to rule that out as soon as possible. Would you join that call?
I think there may well be a role for international carbon credits if they're done well, and that's a big if.
What do you mean by that?
Well, what that means is that when you purchase something from somewhere outside the UK, you know that it's a genuine emissions reduction and it's really robust. If you do that, essentially that reduces the cost of us meeting our targets, and then that means, importantly, you can go further. So what we'd like to see is the UK adopt a beyond zero target for 2050 if they are intent on using these international credits. And for aviation, it may well be, because of the international regime, the Corsia scheme, that some of those credits do come into the UK, in which case, let's go further, let's increase our zero target to beyond zero.